fall career dinners program. And the turnout is fantastic. I've never seen the dinners sell out so fast as they did this year. That must reflect the extraordinary interest you have. I hope that's the case. And the topics that are available to you. I've had the chance to go around and meet a few of you. I wish I'd had a chance to meet all of you. Every story I've heard so far is a really exciting one about the multidisciplinary interests and backgrounds that people have, the places you already are, the progress you're already making on your careers. And it seems an enthusiastic interest, even in these difficult times, that you're looking forward to a significant international career in any one of these areas. And I can tell you, despite the politics of whatever the moment is or whatever the decade, every time a team of people who is devoted to these critical issues in international development, international affairs, policy affairs, both at home and abroad, there's success because of what you're accomplishing in your career. I've never seen these fields go backwards. It's not like a cookie-cutter manufacturing job. It's a lifetime of total energy and learning and contribution that you'll be welcome in, and you will make a contribution that it will be outstanding. So we're very fortunate that you're here tonight, and I hope that the program will turn out to be something you can benefit from. It's also just an introduction and a taste to other opportunities that you can have. You can follow up with us as an association, and the speakers you have and other people around town you'll learn through our guest speaker tonight, Loyce Pace. And we're very much looking forward to your getting together and learning about each other in that process. The United Nations Association is an association that's mainly voluntary people helping to run it, volunteers joining it, and we have about 1,200 members. And the good news is we believe that the fastest growing population of the association are people like yourselves. We say that young professionals are under the age of 40. Well, that's stretching young, I must say. On the other hand, moving up through and taking charge of and leading organizations while you're under 50, I'll put it that way, is really a good thing for those institutions. I grew up for 50 years working on education and learned, I thought too late in my career, but not so late it didn't work, to learn a lot about other disciplines. And then from age 45 to 75, I focused on learning a lot about multidisciplinary approaches, which is certainly the focus of work and careers today and where you're headed. I think the dinners will be exciting tonight. We have good speakers, outstanding. I want to thank the speakers who are here. How many are already here? Could you raise your hand so people know who the speakers are tonight, or maybe they're not all here yet? There's one, just you. You're going to do all 6 dinners. Okay. Okay, they'll all get here in time to do that. The association's been in existence since the early 50s, and we're very excited because next year is the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. And in a word or two, our mission is simply to enable there to be supportive, full engagement by you as citizens, by residents here who are concerned about international affairs, concerned about the future of our country, to relate well, thoughtfully, and give full support to encouraging some of the policymakers here in Washington as well to give full support and budget support so necessary for the well-being of the United Nations to continue to play leadership in the world. I'm so glad many of you are interested in careers in the United Nations. That's also in a very exciting area beyond NGOs. So a very warm welcome. I have the pleasure of introducing Paula Boland. Paula Boland is our executive director of the organization, has for 12 years. She leads this effort of a team of staff over near DuPont Circle. But the outreach of this small team is just extraordinary, not only to you, but to almost all the universities in town and many other organizations in the fields that you're interested in. Without further ado, I'll let Paula say a few more words and introduce our speaker this evening. Paula?
Thank you, Steve. And happy UN month. I know that we are already in November, but the career dinners have always been a part of our long month celebration of the anniversary of the UN, this year 74. So happy UN month, and thank you so much for joining us this evening as we have our fall edition of Career Dinners, which is the signature program of our young professionals, ably led by Laura Blyler here on my left. She's the Vice President for Young Professionals, and Lanice Williams, the co-chair, who cannot be with us, but she's definitely here in spirit and has worked very hard to make tonight's possible. I want to start by thanking the UN Foundation for hosting us this evening, as well as many other programs that we have had this month and throughout the year, to UNA-USA for their support, to my staff, and for everyone who has been working so hard this month in making a variety of different programs possible. My staff, Andrew Dahl, and our program assistants, a really big shout out, because it's been incredible, all the work that has been put to make this possible. Thank you, and thank you also to all the many volunteers that are present with us tonight and at previous events. We couldn't do it without your help. And of course, to all of our generous sponsors who are included in your program booklet, but I will thank here our president, Steve Mosley, who not only is generous with his financial support, but also with his time. He's always present at our programs and helping us make this possible. To Tom Bradley, our vice president for programs in the back, for helping us with programs, but also for donating the reception that we are having this evening. So thank you all, and to all that are also hosting the dinners outside of the foundation. We're having past President Karen Mulhauser hosting the Climate and Gender Dinner, and Heather Hill, chair of our Human Rights Committee, hosting the dinner on human rights and journalism. And there are other board members, past presidents such as Edison Dick and Don Bliss, who have also sponsored dinners. And to the APSIA, which is the Association for International Schools, for their support as well. Thank you so much for all of your support. So this is the signature program, and it's a program dear to my heart because, as Steve said, I joined this organization over 10 years ago in many different roles, and I started as a volunteer with the young professionals. So I have a special attachment to the young professionals, and I just want to share with you that it has really changed my life and my career. I'm an attorney by training, coming from Latin America, but it was through the young professionals that and UNA that I discovered my passion for international affairs, and it made a 180-degree shift in my career. So to you, I say, who are seeking to advance your careers or maybe transitioning, to be open, expose yourself, take risks, get involved and engage in the causes that are dear to your heart, and volunteer your time, because it can really help you find your true passion and purpose in this life. So thank you to everyone, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our board member and president and executive director of the Global Health Council, Loyce Pace, who comes to this role with several years of experience and having been on the ground in more than 10 countries, delivering health programs and mobilizing advocates. She's coming to this role having held leadership positions in global policy and strategic partnerships at Livestrong Foundation and the American Cancer Society. She's really been a very strong advocate for global health, and I would say globally and at the community level too. Everywhere where you got to live. She had the opportunity to live in Asia, in Africa, and in Europe, right? Not yet in Latin America. We'll have to, we have to get you there. They need you there. Anyways, she's been a champion for policies to access to essential medicines. She's testified for Congressional Global Health Appropriations, launched the Non-Communicable Diseases Roundtable under her organization, which convenes organizations representing multiple issues and sectors around shared advocacy goals. And there's much more details along with what the Global Health Council does in your program booklet. So without further ado, I want to call Loyce to come and join us. Thank you very much. And go nuts.
Yeah, go nuts, exactly. I'm glad people showed up after the rally. I wasn't sure how I was going to do against that. So look, thank you, Paula. Thank you, Steve, wherever you went, there you are. I appreciate the invite tonight. It's kind of weird to have you guys all out there looking at me, wondering what I'm going to say. Very appreciative, though, to be here. And as Paula said, I'm on the board of UNA-NCA, and I'm just really proud to serve in that capacity. I can only echo what was already said about the importance of this organization and just like interest in the space, right? There aren't a lot of people who really believe in multilateralism and diplomacy in the way that we all do in this room, so I think kudos to us. And the more people we can recruit for this cause, I think the better. As you can already tell, I have kind of an informal style, so hopefully you can forgive me not having like slides or formal remarks. I got my phone to help me remember things. But I thought that tonight I could just sort of tell you a bit of my story. I'm not going to run through my resume because you guys can find that on LinkedIn, obviously. But I think we can have a little bit of back and forth about, I guess, my path to this place. Is that what you kind of wanted me to cover? And a good place that I like to start is thinking about what kind of gets me up in the morning and keeps me up at night. And for me, that has a lot to do with purpose. So I think that's a common theme for a lot of us where we think, okay, what's the whole mantra about the change we want to see in the world, right? Like, what are we really passionate about? What do we really want to accomplish, ultimately? And, I have to be honest, I think there are a few people who know this, but that, for me, didn't start in some other part of the world. It started at home. And I'm from Los Angeles. That's my home city. Anybody here from Cali? Hey, Cali people. You can tell I'm from Cali, probably, just because I said Cali. It's really important for me to start there, though, because for me, growing up there when I did in the 80s, it was pretty tough. And it was really a stark example of inequity, whether it was around the gun violence that we experienced, whether it was around, my dad having to travel half an hour to an hour to go find fresh fruits and vegetables. Like, that stuff was happening for me at home, and that really is what kept me up at night at the time. And so when I moved back in the 90s, because I did end up going away to school and needing to escape some of those things, I was really committed to seeing how I could sort of try and close the gap there. And was really honored to work with a lot of people, a lot of different champions and local leaders who were committed to the same things. And I learned a lot in that process. And to the degree anyone can work in a voluntary capacity at the community level, as Paula was saying, I highly encourage it. We live in DC where there's a lot of opportunity for work like that, and it'll take you far, not just professionally, but personally. And so that's where kind of my story begins, if you will. But as I continue to work with people in that capacity, as I continue to work at the community level back home, it's funny how you start to realize it's not just a South Central problem, right? Like, it's a problem in Atlanta and DC. It's a problem in rural Appalachia. It's on native reservations, and then it's a problem in maybe Mexico City and maybe in Manila and other places where I was kind of learning. Oh, wait a minute, we are connected in this way. We are connected, unfortunately, in this sort of experience with inequity. And suddenly I found myself going from Los Angeles to Lagos and really working more in other parts of the world on this issue and in ways I didn't expect. I was facing or encountering or addressing some of the same problems with communities on the ground in Asia and Africa and elsewhere. But then also I found them identifying similar solutions, which was fascinating to me. So one example was I remember being at home and working with African American communities and having a lot of our programs happen at beauty salons or barbershops. And when I was in South Africa and in Joburg, and they were doing the same thing, and we were sort of like learning from each other those experiences. Similarly, I was working with Spanish-speaking communities in LA, and we were borrowing sort of promotora programs, what's the community health worker or outreach educator programs from the border towns. And so it's just that, really recognizing that exchange and that common ground was really quite powerful. And something else that was sort of a common theme across those experiences was, again, I was just learning from all these awesome people who were changing the game. And this was less about me and more about me learning from them. And yet I grew increasingly frustrated that they only had so many resources. Like they were sort of, eventually they would get stuck. No matter how high they would rise, they would sort of be limited by what I came to understand as sort of a ceiling of the system. And so whether it's around kind of policies or funding or something else that was holding them back, they couldn't sort of break through some of those outstanding limitations at the community level, and I think that's something we see a lot too, and maybe again while we're all here, because we recognize the power of policy. And so that kind of brings me to DC, right? It was when I learned that politics mattered in a really important way, in a really critical way. And for me, it was Washington, but for someone else, it could be Geneva or New York or Brussels, you know. But there are these centers of power, for better or worse, where I think at the time I thought, well, this is where the magic happens. This is where I can like create big change and really like, again, kind of break the box when it came to that those systemic issues. But what I learned, and maybe what people already know here, what I didn't know already coming to DC, is while you know, these are places where a lot of change can happen, it's sort of idealism cloaked in pragmatism and process, which for me was, you know, daunting if not discouraging. And so I had to really step back, and I continue to struggle with this a little bit, this idea that we have to really think about finding more and more compromise and kind of temper our ambition with some level of agreement. I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that I don't believe in sort of that level of collaboration or diplomacy, if you will. But I have found it limiting. And it's tough to say as a global health person, because it's something in which we've really come to pride ourselves in the global health community. You have an initiative like the PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, this groundbreaking initiative 20 years ago, now it's been, that it was launched. And it brought together some unlikely partners, not just Democrats and Republicans, but faith-based organizations, you know, churches and like, along with the LGBTQ community. Like that's not something that, especially now, you know, it's hard to see examples like that. So it can happen, and yet it doesn't always work. So something that I've been challenged with in my role at the Global Health Council in recent months or years, for example, has been around this issue of family planning. And I'm not just talking about abortion, but I'm talking about just basic access to contraception around the world, and the fact that there are advocates and elected officials and others who are even limiting something that is, regardless of politics, you know, the data show us in public health that those things really matter and they save lives. And we have had debates internally about to what degree Global Health Council steps out on some of those seemingly controversial issues. And I think I could have made a decision with my board to sort of ignore that, you know, leave that fight to that community. And it was really important to me and to our leadership that that's not something that we did, that we sort of lean into our solidarity. And, you know, it's sort of inconvenient to do that in some regards, but I think it's critically important. And one of the main reasons it's important, aside from the sort of moral argument, is I'm thinking about the people we're serving on the ground, right? I'm not just thinking about what's convenient for us here and what's serving people in their room as you're sort of negotiating these things, but what do they need? They're not broken up by priorities. They don't exist in silos. They're whole people who need a range of services, who require a number of things across the health spectrum and arguably across the development spectrum, right? So health, education, economic development, and the like. And so we at GHC, and just sort of me personally, I think you know, I've tried to just work more with that in mind, and I can really appreciate, you know, you, Steve, mentioning this sort of multidisciplinary mindset, and I was talking to someone earlier about the importance of intersectionality. I think this is something that you all, or a lot of people in this room, are kind of on the cusp of advancing for the rest of us who weren't able to come up in that space in that way. But if I can say nothing else, it's that is welcome, at least by me, you know, the people who connect dots. Because I'm thinking again about, okay, well, how do I sort of fuse now this sense of purpose with this very real pragmatic view of the world that there are a lot of people in this town, you know, they still have that. They still believe like, it's just safer to keep the peace and not try to make everything so complex. But I think there's an argument to say, well, actually, you know, we're stalling in a lot of the progress that we're making, right? And we see that in the health space, we see that on the 2030 goals. You know, we're not keeping pace with the need. And so one could say, well, we could do more if we came together in a more meaningful way, if we worked more to connect those dots, right? And if we again, sort of did the hard thing of finding ways we can work together and really sort of leverage that common ground. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's essential that we sort of pool our collective purpose and passion in that way, so that we can just so we stand a greater chance. And again, it's, there's a lot of risk involved, right? Like you can also borrow problems and enemies. And, you know, believe me, there are doors that closed to us once Global Health Council started to speak out more on family planning in this town and otherwise. But guess what? We made a lot of friends too, right? And I think by again, finding that common ground, by finding that solidarity with one another, we can really mobilize the masses to move mountains. So that's all I wanted to share this evening with you. Again, I'm really grateful to be here. I wanted to and requested a good deal of Q&A. So I hope people do have questions for me, for each other, because I'd love to hear from you how, you know, I can do better and do right by you and, again, the people we're trying to serve outside this room. Thanks a lot.
I'll just moderate. So, sure, okay. So, anybody have any questions for Loyce? Nobody has questions. Okay.
Hi, my name is Kayla McGill. I loved what you were saying about kind of looking at the communities and how they are all around the world, what they're working towards and how they find the solutions. And kind of how you wrapped up saying that reaching out and finding those common connections is really important for moving forward, and that's so profound, so true. How have you been able to do that? Because especially in such a hard time where we are today, I'm just really curious how you've been able to.
Yeah, so great question. One example I didn't give is looking at the UN General Assembly last month and the climate summit. There was also some people here might know this, but there was a health meeting at the same time, which was sort of ill-timed because no one was paying attention to our whole universal health coverage meeting. Everyone was focused on climate, as they should have been. But we in the health community and we at GHC kind of saw that as a chance to build that bridge in a way. So we talked a bit in that week about sort of even the connection between natural disasters and disease outbreaks or migration of health workers and things like that. So I know you were getting at a different sort of question, but that's one way we've tried to kind of find unlikely partners or partners that don't exist for us right now. I think that the tougher stuff is the political stuff right now. And the rhetoric we are hearing that it just doesn't matter what we do in the world. I am an idealist, but my hope is grounded in a real understanding that when you actually talk to people about what it is they care about, even if they're not using our language, they're like, oh, well, yeah, we should actually, like, feed people, or people shouldn't die of preventable diseases, or, you know, like, if you're not talking about tax dollars and things like that, you can actually break through in a way. So a lot of times it's about the narrative, and I think that also is a way that we've been able to still maintain some connection to people who might be perceived as on the other side of something, when really we're talking about the same thing, just in different ways. Mm-hmm. I can moderate too, that's fine.
Hi. Okay. So you said that you were very motivated by living in the disparities that you have to live through in California. I also I'm from Jamaica, and I had to live through numerous disparities, and that motivated my interest in international affairs, health equity and stuff like that. So I was just wondering, how do you motivate other people who are currently living in those situations, like to do something about it, just like how I want to and how you have done something.
They work in international affairs specifically, or?
Like, how do you get like community members to like want to push change?
Oh, well, that's a small question. You meet them where they are, honestly. You know, I mean, it's really hard to ask people to, you know, show up and go to some meeting in the middle of the day and they're trying to work several jobs and raise several children, or, you know, whatever. They might have a lot going on. So that's how I ended up in churches a lot. That's how I ended up at community meetings, you know, that went until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. That's how, you know, I spent a lot of my weekends trying to see what they really wanted and then say, well, actually, there's this thing that we can do together that might get you partway there. I think it's also important to be careful kind of over-promising, because we all know how this works or doesn't sometimes, and that can be really discouraging to people in communities who are sort of using their precious time to try and see something happen, and it can be really discouraging if it falls short. So I think sort of like, I think my job was always to kind of help identify the opportunity and measure even the small wins to some degree. There's the last thing I'll say on that is there's power in collective action. And so it's just like an individual, I think we find that ourselves, right? I run a coalition for a reason because I'm exhausted half the time and I need the help. And so if you apply that to the community level, like you can connect champions to each other in a way that feels very empowering to them. And I saw that even in the global work that I did, really, even just having like the folks from Thailand meet the folks from Philippines, meet the folks from Malaysia, and they're like, oh, wait, you're dealing with all this stuff too with your government. Well, how did you do that? You know, so it kind of builds that way. Yep.
My name's Sarah. I really appreciate also how you talk about a lot of it is about reaching across the aisle to unlikely partners, right? But that comes with an element of being willing to give up a little bit of what you hold to be truths in order to match them. And I'm very curious how you sort of negotiate that willingness for compromise, because especially with topics as serious as people's livelihoods and their identities, like these aren't, I would imagine they're not negotiable, but to a certain extent you have to be willing to change what you think. So how do you decide this is something I'm fundamentally not going to negotiate versus this is something I'm willing to have a conversation on?
Y'all are bringing it tonight. Okay, so for me, I'm kind of a scientist at heart, so I know that can sound very righteous as well to say like, well, science says this, but I really try to lean into the data, which I feel is more objective. I think a lot of the issues arise when we're solely emotional. I do believe in emotion and science coming together, so that's also fine. But there are times when it just calls for us to strip away the feelings around things. And that's often my solution, is to really say, okay, well, show me where and how you were seeing this in just sort of black and white. And there's sort of less gray to navigate in that regard. But I'm very curious to see how other people approach that too, because that's the question oftentimes. Oh, there's another mic. All right, well, if you want to share your solution later, that's also fine. Are there other questions?
Hi, my name is Anna, and I have a question about urgency. I find it, a lot of people, as you said, believe that people shouldn't die and health is important, but how do we mobilize people and make them understand that the issues we care about or work, like whatever space it is, it's urgent? And I'm asking to give some context. So I work for a nonprofit that brings Israelis and Palestinians to Washington, D.C. to speak with policymakers and to hopefully influence their policies because they affect us back home. Yeah. And I think a lot of people we speak to understand that things have to change, but they don't understand that they have to change right now. Exactly. So how do we do that?
Well, and it's especially hard when something is as protracted as that, right? Where it's just like, we've been living with this for so long, and we haven't done anything to this point, so what's the rush? TB is another good example, tuberculosis. It's just like an old-timey thing that folks don't realize is a real problem, and it's been many, many years that we haven't done anything about it. I mean, I'll kind of cheat and borrow a bit from my last response. I do think the data are critically important. I mean, to the extent, I don't know how you apply it in the example you gave, but I think for us, we are talking about how a lot of conditions really affect global economies. I think it's also important to tie what we do to obviously urgent issues like climate change. You know, if we're able to say like, well, look, you've acknowledged that that's a real issue, and guess what, there are health implications or consequences of something like that, then that is also something that we've been able to use as leverage of sorts. And then I still believe in the power of storytelling, and so I applaud you for bringing people in, and it's
exactly what we do, storytelling.
Yeah, exactly, right. So that's why I'm like, you get that part. And, you know, I think having people in front of folks and saying like, no, I live this every day, and this is keeping me from doing X, Y, Z. But this is the frustrating thing about politics. I guess you can use it against itself and really say, well, you know, while you're still in office for the next however many years, like, you can get this thing done and you can be really awesome. We're facing that now in the health community, where there are folks who are retiring who all of a sudden want to bring up things that we've been fighting for the past decade. So in some ways it is what it is, but it's something that frustrates me as well, and I think a lot of us here. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for you. Yeah, exactly. Keep up the fight.
Hi, my name's Hannah. I just kind of wanted to jump off of that and ask how much public sentiment plays into this. So you brought up family planning, and obviously there's a big movement to protect abortion right now, especially with who's on the Supreme Court. So how much do you need public sentiment to be in your favor in order for these issues to come to the table?
I think we need a lot more than we have. So that I really like that question, because for a couple of reasons. One is there is a survey that Kaiser Family Foundation does every year that looks at what people think happens in international development and in global health investments. And people think we spend much more than we do, right? When they're just surveying regular Joes and Janes, folks think we spend about 25% of the budget on this stuff, and it's less than 1%. So I think that you're sort of shifting people's thinking around that is really important. I think also, you know, it's something else we've been talking about in our community is the fact that global health and global development, they're not voter issues. And so it really works against us when we consider ourselves advocates, and we know that who really drives advocacy are constituents. But if constituents aren't calling or otherwise showing up and talking about this stuff, then who cares? You know, like the constituents, and this is even applying to Democrats and progressive constituents, rightfully are calling and asking about education and immigration and, you know, some of those in U.S. healthcare. And so to the degree we can, again, link to those issues or, you know, spur interest in what it is we're doing, whether even just at a basic level, international engagement, I think that can be really powerful, especially for leadership on the Hill. Alrighty. I know y'all are ready to eat too. Oh, sorry, there's somebody else. You are standing between us and dinner.
Okay. So, well, thank you, first of all, for speaking with all of us. Kind of more of a broad question, but I know, so Paolo mentioned, and you've mentioned yourself, that you've had a lot of experience and the ability to live in different places, in different countries. And I was just wondering how you would say that has fueled you, but also how you manage not to be overwhelmed by seeing all of these disparities.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I always manage not to be overwhelmed. The work is hard, and self-care is a real thing. So I sing in a choir. I sing tomorrow. So like those are things that sustain me, and I say that with a smile, but it's also really true. I mean, find your joy and hang on to that. I think also, though, I'm so uplifted when I travel and when I work with people. I mean, the hardest part of my job is being stuck in Washington, because I think there's a loss of perspective here that happens, and it's really important that, you know, I don't need to be in the field per se, but that I connect with people there, so that I can know what I'm fighting for. So actually, that's how I do it. Okay. Well, thanks again. Have a good night.
Thank you, Loyce. Thank you. So thank you to Loyce, a dear colleague, and wonderful remarks there. I'm Laura Bleiler. I'm the Vice President of Young Professionals. So I helped organize all of this with a great team of volunteers. You probably see them around pouring you wine, checking you in at the front. So if you could raise your hand if you're a volunteer and look around just so we can acknowledge them. We have Cole, Taylor, Robert, Isabella, Kyle, Ona, Katie, Angela, Michaela. I think I got everyone, Cole, Taylor, Angela. Yeah. So anyway, thank you. And also to Lenise, she's the chair of the program and co-organizer, and she can't be here today, but she is really sad she's missing it. And I just want to take one quick second to share kind of how I got here and why I'm here, and I think that you all could be here too. I started as a volunteer almost 10 years ago with UNA-NCA, helping out with the Global Classrooms program. I wanted to get paid to do Model UN, like that. I thought that could happen. So I started volunteering, helping out with their spring conference, and eventually starting to come to these career dinners and going to a committee meeting, and now I'm on the board. So I just encourage you, if you're looking to fill some gaps in your resume, maybe you need some fundraising experience or event planning experience, or you just want to be around people who are discussing interesting topics, then encourage you to join us. We're going to be recruiting to fill some volunteer leadership roles in the near future by the end of the year. We're trying to stack our committee, anticipating for some life changes that are coming our way. So we're going to be sending a follow-up email. If you're really interested in getting involved and can't wait for the application, then you can respond to the email, but you then can also look out for announcements on our website and future newsletters. So we really hope that we'll see you at events that are coming up soon, including the Human Rights Awards reception, which is in December. You should not miss it. But so that we can wrap up and get to dinner. First, so I know it's a little complicated because we have 2 groups leaving and going to board members' homes, and then 4 groups staying here. So if you're part of the Careers in Human Rights and Journalism and Careers in Climate and Gender, we ask you to wrap up, drink your wine, and head to the front registration area and meet your group there, and then we'll coordinate rides.